All right, thank you so much. Welcome to another episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor need to know. Jennifer, I've made the book, the PDF of the book, free for Lyme survivors since it was published, and have sent out over close to 2,000 copies. If you'd like to get your PDF, if you're a Lyme survivor, reach out to me via Facebook or LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to send it to you. You could also get the book on Amazon. It's available there as well. And if you do get the book up on Amazon or the PDF, please go up and give me an Amazon review. I would greatly appreciate that. You're raising your fingers. Everything okay?
No, I'm going, yes.
Yes, absolutely. And the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast is available on Apple Podcasts. Go up and give us a 5-star review if you're a subscriber. We'd appreciate that. And it's also, of course, available on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you very much. Go give us a thumbs up, give us a comment, and we would love to see that. Jennifer, we've had some shows that are approaching the multi-thousands up on YouTube, and we're in the 40s right now with our episodes. We're doing today's interview with Dr. Jennifer Gardella. She's the author of Listen for the Whispers of Abuse. So again, I want to thank you for being here. And your story is interesting, and there's a lot of corollaries to. I mean, I don't mean to say lightly interesting. It's we'll get deep into it, and it's very, very compelling. And there's a lot of applicability that I've seen from our conversations and from your book for the people who are Lyme disease survivors, particularly chronic Lyme disease survivors. Trauma is a word that comes up all the time, and we're going to get deep into some of the corollaries between surviving domestic abuse and what you might be experiencing with a chronic illness, particularly Lyme and the co-infections, other tick-borne illnesses. And a word that I was really not all that familiar with prior to my publishing the book and doing all the research on chronic Lyme was trauma. I mean, I knew the word, but I see traumas coming up all the time. As a matter of fact, one of the stories I've told many, many times is I was listening to a webinar in the summer of 2021 with Dr. Richard Horowitz, who actually wrote the foreword to my book. He, of course, is the author of How Can I Get Better? He's one of the foremost Lyme literate medical doctors on the planet, if not the foremost. And he was giving a presentation on Lyme disease in one of the webinars that I was watching. And remarkably, I knew 90% of what he was talking about because I really dove in. And at the 59th minute of the presentation, he said, "Oh, by the way, you need to get past the trauma of unresolved childhood abuse. Thank you, or else you're never going to recover from your chronic illness." And ever since then, and I've actually had the conversation with him, I've been really trying to get deep because I've met so many Lyme survivors around the world who have communicated to me that they know they're struggling with past trauma. All right. So give us a little bit of an introduction. You're an expert again on surviving domestic abuse. You're the author of Listen for the Whispers of Abuse. Get our audience up to speed. Give us a little bit of your journey and what led you to write the book.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on. I am truly honored when anyone wants to dive into this rather difficult topic to talk about. So I did have wounds from my childhood, which were discovered during my healing journey, but originally that led me into the arms of an abuser. And what I've since learned is that since the minute that we met, he had a premeditated plan to rope me in and tear down my life. That is what abusers do. So we had a very stereotypical domestic violence / abuse timeline to us, where we went through the love bombing phase, we went through the wrapping in phase. Then we went through, as I like to say, being dragged into this emotional playground, this abuser's playground, where he just psychologically and emotionally tortured me and my daughters. What led me to write the book? So I escaped domestic violence on April 4th of 2020. My daughters came to me and said, "No more, Mom, we're getting out. We have been abused. We've talked to our therapists about it. This is abuse, domestic violence. We're worthy of more." quite that could be a whole episode in itself, right? But I will move on. We did leave, escaped, ran to Pittsburgh for a month, where I set us up with a new home back in our town, and then went through post-separation abuse for 2 years while I also healed through my local domestic violence center. I did 8 weeks of crisis counseling, 20 sessions of trauma therapy with a trauma specialist, which I think is something that's very important that comes out of this interview for anybody that is suffering from trauma way back in their life. If it happened to you as a young child, please make sure that you just don't find a therapist, that you find a trauma specialist. Every domestic violence center in the country has them on. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I can't speak for all of them. It's a good place to start. Your local domestic violence center, and you qualify even if the abuse was 50 years ago. And I have friends that have gone back and are working with our local domestic violence center to do just that. So I did that for 2 years and then I did something called EMDR, which is a specialized therapy for trauma survivors. I did countless support groups, which were critical to my healing journey. We heal in community. I often say that I got another PhD in me and in healing. And then out of that healing journey, I decided on October 1st of 2022 to start sharing what I had learned. Because I had no idea that I was actually living in domestic violence. There was microaggression, physical abuse, but I wasn't slapped across the face, or, didn't have broken bones. So but I learned a lot. I learned about the love bombing phase. I learned about reactive abuse. I learned about financial and legal abuse. And I said, wow, this information has to get out there. So every day in October of 2022, I posted on my social media accounts a different facet of domestic violence and abuse that I had learned. It was exhausting to create the posts like that every week. And I really gave myself a full-time job in managing the comments, text messages, phone calls from people I hadn't talked to in 20 years, from probably a little bit longer than that, 30 years from college. I'm living in this now. I'm still being stalked. Friends from high school popping out of the woodwork saying, this was my life. How do I heal from it? I can't heal yet. And it was overwhelming to me, the need. And at the end of the month, a good friend said to me, who is a therapist, not a good networking friend, said to me, where are you getting this content? My clients need it. And I said, it's my story that you're reading. And at that point, one of my other best friends said, publish it. People need to hear it. And so for a domestic violence month the following year, just last year in 2023, I published the book on it. I always say it hit October 1st. It hit a couple days before. And that was the genesis of it, was those posts. And honestly, the book didn't change too much from those posts. It's a primer in all of the different types of abuse. And also it's, if you're living in this, what do you do? But there's also space in the book. I made space in the book to talk to support people. Like if you're supporting a victim, how do you interact with that victim? And so that was the evolution of how the book hit my story and how it led to this book, and now is leading to speaking gigs in companies, because it impacts all of us. There's estimates as high as 85% of us in the world experience some sort of trauma and domestic violence in our lives. Most of us, about 50%, are dealing with it on a regular basis.
Wow. So first off, congratulations on publishing the book.
Thank you.
And as you know, everybody here listening knows, I published a book as well. And I've made thousands of new friends around the globe, people coming out of the woodwork, thanking me. And I'm sure they're also acknowledging you. So people were probably listening saying, okay, Fred, you cover topics for chronic Lyme survivors, but you're talking today about domestic abuse. And many Lyme survivors have gone through similar traumas, right? It may not be the same exact thing as you, but I've met so many who say things like, and we'll talk about this, the re-traumatizing in a little bit, but have gone through similar life-altering traumas, right? For something that they didn't ask for.
Right.
One thing we talk a lot about, you didn't ask to be abused. And one thing we talk a lot about on the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast is nobody said, gee, I want to be bitten by a tick today. Right?
Right.
And nobody said, gee, I'm going to go on a cruise, on a cabin, on a, canoe down in the Ozarks and get bitten by a tick and ruin my life. Nobody said, I'm going to walk through Central Park in New York.
Right.
And get bitten by a tick. perhaps it's not the domestic abuse like you went through, but speak to some of the similarities. So the chronic Lyme survivors who are typically listening to the podcast, they can understand, that their trauma, where their trauma is similar to what you went through, and why I invited you to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing I think that we all need to realize is whether it is domestic violence or, you're a victim of Lyme or both, it's not your fault. The trauma is not your fault. And I think the more that we realize, if you did go walk through New York City on vacation, well, it's my fault because I did that. Not really. It's it, and the second piece is that's really important is we were not trained for this. You're
Mm.
not trained to get Lyme disease. You're not trained for domestic abuse. And while it's not particularly a popular opinion, I do believe that at the core it rings true. When you sign up for service in one of our military branches, you sign up, you get trained, and there's a possibility you're going to get captured. You're trained with how to deal with that abuse. And then when you leave service, you actually go home to heal without living in abuse. With Lyme victims and those who are dealing with the trauma of having Lyme disease, because it is life altering and not fun, right? It is a terrible incident, which we would consider to be a trauma. As with domestic violence, we didn't sign up for it. I fell in love with him, but did not sign up to be abused. I didn't, just like your survivors don't sign up to be bitten by ticks. It's the exact same thing. We're not trained on what to do. There's very little support for us because it manifests in so many different ways, right? Your Lyme there are certainly initial issues that everybody has, or maybe not. There's a specific set of symptoms, but then there's also all these other things. Some people have lifelong psychological problems. Same with domestic violence survivors. You can get all of the healing. You can rebuild your life. You can move on as a survivor. And just like you may not have Lyme anymore in your body, but there's this little piece that is still sticking around. So I always like to say there's a PTSD to these things that we as trauma survivors, and again, we never out trauma each other, right? So Lyme is not worse than domestic violence, is not worse than serving in the military and being captured. Not, we don't out trauma each other, but there's a pattern that we all follow that we can then support each other, at least with collectively, if nothing else, with our energy.
That's a great point, and reminded of an old statement that we're on the same ocean, the same storm, but in a different boat. So
Exactly.
yeah, and it's also, I mean, we use the analogy that if you break an ankle, every orthopedic surgeon on the planet is going to put you in a cast and sit you on your butt for a couple of weeks to recover. With Lyme, one of the challenges is, of course, is there's so much that goes into your treatment, especially when it gets in to the chronic stage, and so many different factors. And then, of course, the co-infections. The other challenge too, which you kind of touched on, is, and one of the reasons why I wrote the book Love, Hope, Lyme, what family members, partners, and friends of a chronic Lyme survivor need to know, is a lot of people didn't believe you. When you have
Oh,
Lyme, and I want to talk to you about that. I mean, a lot of people with Lyme, they look okay, and I think there was even a book written called "You Look Okay," and but meanwhile, I can't get out of bed.
mhm.
My feet are burning. I spoke somewhat recently to a friend of mine who's a new friend who's a chronic Lyme survivor, and unbeknownst to me, she said she's been bedridden for the last 8 years. I didn't know, uh, had no idea. Um, we'll talk about that for a second or two. Again, you mentioned that, I don't know if people, you said you weren't hit, you didn't have the bruises that a lot of times people might think about with someone who's abused. Uh, do people believe you? It's the same thing that I've heard so much with Lyme. It's, you don't look sick. It's like, well, and also if you go to the internet and if you type in, does chronic Lyme exist? You'll see some pages which say medical practitioners doubt. They even have another word for it, post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome, right? And just to do that, and people get into this cycle of, my family doesn't believe me, my friends don't believe me, etc.
Yeah, and the famous, is it really that bad? Like,
Oh,
was it really that bad?
oh,
You're still functioning. It's okay. You're standing on 2 feet. So how bad could it really have been? Every once
yeah.
in a while, you do get that. And or you get what, and I'm sure your Lyme survivors get this as well. Why didn't you do something about it?
Ooh.
And you can visit 1,000 doctors sometimes, and they'll all either tell you the same thing, or sadly, again, they weren't trained, right? Because Lyme is a tricky thing.
Yes.
One of my kids had an ear infection and they thought it was Lyme disease. I mean, I'm
Mm.
not kidding you. This happened like a long time ago. But she was in the hospital for 4 days. So they'd actually don't know what everything looks like and how it manifests. And with domestic violence, as with Lyme, a little differently, but domestic violence, even after escape, can manifest into things like severe psychological issues.
Mm.
It can manifest into eating disorders. You can shut down for the smallest thing. And also it manifests into other health issues years later. Very little data about it because not that many people come forward, just like my PhD is in educational research. So, I'm sure we're not tracking Lyme survivors 30, 40 years into the future, but what are they experiencing? And I've talked to family member after family member who said, he never hit her, he never killed her, but she died of cancer and we blame him because of the psychological abuse. It just wore down their lives. And so there's so many, again, similarities in the trauma patterns of completely different swim lanes, but we're all in the same place at the end. And this idea that people don't believe that what we're experiencing, like I had severe financial abuse in my relationship, and that in and of itself manifested in different ways. And I remember a good friend's, I was trying to share with a friend what I was going through, and it was, well, it's your money now, like what's the big deal? And it took years to unravel. The big deal is that regret. What did I allow? And so same thing. It's the exact same thing when, like, can't you, Lyme is 30 years before, you had it 5 years ago, or you did the antibiotics for 6 weeks. Can't you get over this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people I've met who um, people listen. I don't mean to trigger people who are listening, but I've heard people say things like, I miss who I was, right?
Right.
Or I miss the person who I was before this. Um, I want to ask you, before I ask you some suggestions, you mentioned EMDR. Can you just talk about what that is?
Yes. You know what, though? I am unprepared. Sorry. Sorry, audience. EMDR is a specific type of trauma therapy. It is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Yes, I just looked that up on Google just to make sure I was giving factual information. And here's what it is. After a trauma survivor has gone through talk therapy, and after they are considered safe. So this doesn't work from what I understand, with ongoing trauma, right? So if you're living in abuse and you haven't left yet. For me, I was out. I was still living in abuse in that I had 105 instances of post-stalking, post-separation abuse, stalking, harassment, that kind of stuff. My therapist, though, thought that I was safe. They have figured out the psychology of it, that the movement of the eyes, rapid eye movement back and forth with the memory, with the regurgitation of a memory, can lessen the psychological feelings that you have, the emotional response to that trauma. I thought when I was going through this that it was complete hooey. And I said to my therapist, trained trauma, trained EMDR expert, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. And you're literally either watching something like you're looking at two Post-it notes on either side of your computer, or I chose the tapping, alternating my legs with tapping with my hands. And I would close my eyes and I would tap, and she would bring me back into the memory. Probably the most painful thing I've ever done, except live through the original trauma. And wouldn't you know it, it got through. So the way that I describe it to people, which apparently makes a lot of sense on both sides, those that know what it is and those that don't, trauma memories, again, from our childhoods right through adulthood, sit on top of our psyche like pond scum.
Mm.
And things can't get in. Other new memories can't get in, or they get stuck in the scum, right? We're experiencing something beautiful, almost like triggers, right? It just gets stuck there and we can't even enjoy things because we're stuck in that trauma. EMDR starts to break apart that pond scum. And if you work with the right person, it works 100%. It was crazy what it did to me. Completely released when he would stalk me at the gym, completely released that emotional attachment that I had walking in the door the next day. It was wild.
Yeah, they talk a lot about how a flare, either a mental or a physical flare, will trigger something, a car accident. Obviously, a lot of this became apparent, during the pandemic when certain types of recommended government solutions might trigger something, reemerge, the bacteria that might have been dormant in your body
Right.
for decades, if you will. I want to talk about. I'm going to kind of throw you down another path here. You talked about the concept of re-traumatizing and the
Hmm.
fact that you had mentioned that there were continual traumatizing events. And uh, I met someone recently who has said to me, someone who's public on social media with her Lyme journey, said that she's still traumatized going onto a field, right?
Hmm.
And this is someone who confidently, we became friends because she confidently communicated via social media, how she was doing and gave advice and had a supportive community. And when we spoke, she said, I'm still afraid to go to fields. Like she was invited to a picnic for one of her children's school picnics or something. And she chose not to go because she just didn't want to be in that world. Seeing deer, I
Sure.
mean, I'm in the Philly area. I know you're in the Mid Atlantic as well. There's deer all over the place. I call deer Hiltons now, or tick Hiltons, because they're beautiful, but I know that they have like a couple thousand ticks on them. Talk about the concept of re-traumatizing, the communal com, col, com, accumulate the cumulative
Div.
effects of multiple traumas continuing, and like how does your body respond to these frequent traumas? A lot out there, but obviously something you could definitely hit on.
Yeah, so first let's take cumulative trauma, right? This is the concept that when we experience trauma, again, in our early childhood and then through high school, and then it's like Lego blocks. They just kind of build up in our psyche, and suddenly we have an awful lot of trauma that our body is storing. And there are, there's a lot of research out there about how our body stores that trauma in places, and that is not healthy. There's a lot of woohoo doctors that will work with you to release the trauma. There's also yoga informed trauma
Mm,
to try to release that out of your body, but it causes this like again, it's like muck hanging out inside your body. And then the problem that also brought up is we are re-traumatized
mm,
continually. So every time we have to go to a doctor, I have to explain, like I have a protected address through the state of Pennsylvania. My trauma, my abuse happened in Pennsylvania. And so I have a protected address through the state for the rest of my life. No matter where I live in the world, all of my mail can be forwarded there. And then they are the only ones that will ever know where I actually am.
mm,
But trying to explain why I have this weird looking address that's a P.O. box in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is traumatizing to me. I'm always begging people to please, okay, we have to use this one. Well, why? What's your actual street address? It's traumatizing. Then you have therapy appointments, and if you have to switch therapists and start over, that is traumatizing. It's almost like a Lyme patient that has to switch doctors. And then you have to call the insurance company, but they've lost your forms. So now you have to go over your medical history. And even when you make new friends, it's traumatizing to explain why are you in this situation that you're in. And
mm.
this continually builds. What's also funny for me now is when I walk around in the world, people love to tell me their trauma stories.
Yes.
And like you, right? You've become this amazing resource for people that are experiencing Lyme disease, but you're also, whenever you are hearing these bits and pieces, there are pieces that trigger inside of you.
Mm,
And that is adding to your cumulative trauma as well. Why it's important that we all practice, releasing it. And the best way to ever do that is again to say, the trauma is not my fault. It's not my
yes.
fault. What I'm experiencing before that led to this and what I'm experiencing now. And again, for domestic violence survivors, just like Lyme survivors, it's easy to pinpoint, I got myself into this. But at the end of the day, it was not your fault that you got into it either.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I wish I had my book handy here because the last line I have in my book is just because she was bitten by a tick, right? Or he, I mean, it doesn't really matter,
Sure.
but just because they were bitten by a tick all of this has happened through no decision of their own. I like the way you just said that. I want to I want to I want to address a different topic, and you may or not be able to give a whole lot of insights into this, but a lot of Lyme survivors, there's things called like Lyme rage, right? And anger emits, and you don't know why. I've spoken to so many. I remember I spoke to someone who I interviewed for the podcast, the Love Hope Lyme podcast. And by the way, we're talking today with Dr. Jennifer Gardella. She's the author of Listen for the Whispers of Abuse. So I remember I spoke to someone who said she was angry for 5 years, nonstop. She was angry at this disease. She missed her children's toddler years and she was bitterly angry. And I spoke to another woman on a different podcast that I do who said that she did everything possible to push her husband away, everything she could possibly do. And then uh, I'm just kind of curious, like, can you tell if you're being abusive? What might be your advice to the Lyme survivors who see that they have this anger because of this, and they see that they're being abusive to people who love them, right? There's a lot of, again, the reason I wrote this book was to explain to people what your loved one was going through. I didn't know much
Right.
about Lyme disease, and I was very committed to someone in my life. Can you give an angle towards that?
Yeah, it's such a good question because, like abusers, many Lyme survivors may not actually have a lot of control in that situation, right? And that has, again, nothing to do with them, but as fully aware people who want to have healthy relationships and go beyond their Lyme, hopefully. Maybe we talk to people about what they're experiencing and give their partners permission to say a certain phrase or to walk away. Right now, what we don't want partners to do is say, this has nothing to do with me. You have to get it together. You're doing it again. This has to be a partnership and a discussion that happens outside of a flaring event. The decision to make these kind of commitments, whether we write it down. So if you forget a lot of things when you fly into rage, then write it down beforehand. That movie 50 First Dates where she forgets everything every morning. So, and I'm not kidding, like this can save relationships, right? If you come to these agreements and then give each other permission and power to say, okay, here it is again. And domestic abuse survivors go through the exact same thing. When I was dating my now husband, it was like an internship, or I was not used to someone being this nice, and the smallest things would trigger me. And I was able to take a deep breath and say, don't react like you want to. He doesn't mean whatever whatever I think is going on, but I'm getting triggered. And so I'll talk to him about it later. And then I'd call a friend and she would tell me I was wrong and that it was because of the abuse. She was very kind about it. But
Yes.
those are the kind of things that we need to start to make normal, because I would imagine the spouse or the significant other of the Lyme victim has had it themselves. They've been traumatized by what is going on. Their life has changed. They didn't sign up for this either. So let's acknowledge that in each other. And there's nothing wrong with seeking therapy to help you out with this,
Yeah.
and say, okay, so when you flare, you have to ask the person with the Lyme, do you understand what you're doing? Do you know where you are? Or is it complete out of body, I can't calm down experience? And then the therapist can work very closely and say, okay, let's handle it this way. But the spouse partner then makes a commitment not to inflame it. And then maybe there's a punching bag in the basement that they go
Mm.
work out with, right? There has to be an outlet also, and there has to be acknowledgement of, yes, it happened to the person with the Lyme disease, but the spouse is really getting traumatized as well from all the doctor's appointments, all the expense, all of the everything. And so I think that the most beautiful thing that a Lyme patient can probably do is just say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting up with me, even though I may be screaming at you that you're doing a really bad job putting up with me.
No, that's an interesting point. I mean, it's a one of the reasons. Again, I keep saying this. I wrote the book is, I when I first became aware of this world, if you will, someone shared with me that they estimated that 80%, 75 to 80% of relationships will terminate when one of the people has chronic Lyme disease because of a lot of the things that we've addressed today and things that I talk about in the book and things that we've talked about on previous Love, Hope, Lyme episodes. And 90% of the time, it's the spouse who will say, I'm out of
Had it.
here. Say, yeah, I had it. This ain't what I bought off on. You're not who you were. You're
Hmm.
always in bed. You're always angry at me for nothing that I've done, etc. So part of the reason maybe the main reason I wrote the book and your book as well is to help people understand what is really going on so that the love can make its way through. Talk today with Dr. Jennifer Gardella. And again, the book is Listen to the Whispers of Abuse. I'm sure you can get it wherever you buy your books. Jennifer, is there any final thoughts, anything that we didn't address today that you want to make sure we get across?
There is one tiny part that we didn't bring up, and that is the idea that someone with Lyme disease can actually be living in a relationship of domestic violence,
Mm.
and that they are held there by things like money, healthcare,
Mm.
and a place to live and security. And so there are, again, resources for these people. It's very common in a domestic violence relationship where there is any illness or an addiction where that is held over the victim's head as now I have to deal with this. Now I have to save you. I provide you with your health insurance. You'd have no money if it wasn't for me. And again, I just want to make it clear that abuse is not your fault. Honestly, if you didn't have Lyme, there would just be something else that they would be going after you for in your life. So, but there's confidential support that you can get for yourself in any of these situations, by going to your local domestic violence center and asking for help. They don't come and intervene. They don't come and rip you out of your house. They don't come and yell at your abuser. It's all about you and how you're processing it. And there's also an abundance of resources that they have at their disposal. They might not be able to wave a magic wand and make this all disappear, but they may be able to help you unpack, wow, have you looked at this part that's available to you or this thing that could be available to you? And it's sometimes, as I like to say, that the mind that got us into this mess is not the mind that got us out. And so sometimes having fresh eyes from a social services standpoint on our life as well can work wonders. So I just want to
Yeah,
throw that out there.
sure. That's fair. Yeah, actually, I mean, this is one thing that I didn't know again before this is there's this world of support out there, and social media, Facebook, et cetera. You got to be careful because there may be people who have certain things going on, but there's so many. I've done a couple of shows, Jennifer, with people who have created 501(c)(3)s once they've gotten past the initial whatever their journey took them to give back, microloans and
Hmm.
support and things along those lines. All right, I want to thank Jennifer Gardella for being on today's Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. Once again, if you're listening, go up and give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and if you're watching this on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up or a nice comment. Jennifer, thanks again for being on the show.
Well, thank you for bringing this important, topic to light, and also for not staying in your swim lane. I think it's great that when we cross expertise here, it's really good to see out there in the world. So thank you.
Thank you.